So we're going to talk about the rise of sustainability in the travel industry and also how Amadeus sees things and its ambitions in the area. We'll talk about sustainability ecosystems, what's the status on those, and then we'll hear from Travelist, a new partnership, and to find out what the benefits are. And also Chooose, who's going to talk about the solutions along the way. Caphenia will help us understand more about sustainable aviation fuel. Is it the next big thing? And then at the end, we're going to ask our panelists a little bit forward thinking for Travel 2030. What's the vision? But before we hear from the experts, we would like to ask your opinion on just a couple of questions. What we're going to do is we're going to ask your opinions now, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll share the results with you. So our first question, just one answer from you, please, is how important is sustainability for the future of the travel industry? So what's your opinion on that? Do you think it's extremely important? Do you think it's somewhat important? Maybe you're neutral about that point. Maybe you don't think it's that important or not even important at all. So please vote your opinion. It was interesting, I was reading recently that more than 80% of travelers think sustainability or want to make sustainable travel choices. So there's definitely something happening, isn't there, with people's opinions on this topic. So please do vote for your personal opinion, and we'll look at the results at the end of the webinar. So we just have 3 short questions. Our second question will appear momentarily, just recording the answers. There's question 2. So what does sustainable travel look like to you? So we have a few options there, and you can choose all that you think apply. So is it the display of emissions at booking time for people to make an informed choice? Is it carbon offsetting? Is it alternative means of transportation, multimodal transportation options? Is it alternative fuels and new technologies, things like electric and hydrogen? Or is it other efficiency tools, for example, fuel optimization? Or maybe it's something we haven't listed there. Please do give us your opinion on what sustainable travel looks like to you from these options. And then we're going to ask you one final question before we introduce our speakers. And this one, we want to ask you to think in a slightly different way. So for now, we've been talking, a lot of you will be working in the travel industry. So obviously you're giving your opinion on how you see the industry developing. But for the third question, it's a little bit different because actually we want to ask you to think as a traveler. So nearly all of us, or perhaps all of us, are travelers, aren't we? We do travel, we travel for business or for leisure. So if you think as a traveler, are you willing to pay extra as a traveler for more sustainable travel options? So again, just one answer. Yes, you are, no, or maybe. And this is a question that is coming up, isn't it? Because although there's a lot of interest in sustainable travel, the question is, would people, if it costs more, would they be willing to pay more for it? That's been a question that's come up from time to time, hasn't it? So it'll be interesting to get your opinion on that. Just give you a chance to finish voting. Right, so sustainability hasn't always been a priority for many in the travel and tourism industry. So what's changed? Well, let me hand over to Lucas Bobbes, Amadeus's Group Environmental Officer, to explain. Over to you, Lucas.
Thank you, Rob, and hello, everyone. The context, as Rob said, is quite clear then. Concerns over sustainability in travel have risen to unprecedented levels in the last 2 years, and it is very unlikely that they will wane in the foreseeable future. This is as opposed to what happened with the financial crisis in 2008, which overshadowed any attention on sustainability. The COVID-19 pandemic, on the other hand, and its subsequent economic environment have exposed how vulnerable the travel industry was, and that we need to rebuild it in a way that is stronger, safer, and more resilient. Importantly, we have also realized that all of this cannot be done without bringing sustainability to the top of the agenda. Taking sustainability seriously implies that all travel industry stakeholders need to work collaboratively in ways we haven't done in the past, including travel providers, travel sellers, technology companies, industry associations, regulatory bodies, and travelers themselves. In addition to this necessary collaborative approach, we consider technology is going to be a key facilitator for a more sustainable travel industry. In fact, we at Amadeus rely very much on both elements, technology and collaboration, to advance in our sustainability efforts. I will spend the next few minutes describing how do we structure at Amadeus our environmental, social, and governance ambitions. Amadeus ESG ambition expand across four major areas. Environmental sustainability, which is the topic that we are going to be discussing today primarily. The second area is related to our workforce, and with a particular focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as on the attraction and retention of talent. The third area is about our social commitment. Amadeus has a truly global presence, and we have a responsibility to make a positive social impact through various programs like community investment or helping to reduce the digital gap in societies. Finally, our fourth area is related to maintaining the highest standards of governance practices in all we do, especially in those parts that are particularly sensitive to our business, like cybersecurity or data privacy. Ultimately, we want to make sure we have a consistent approach to sustainability across all our business units, solid progress, and the ability to adapt to new circumstances and requirements, whether they be driven by regulation, our customers, or our own analysis. I'm going to talk a bit more about the topic that we are going to be discussing today, which is environmental sustainability. Our environmental sustainability strategy is structured around three elements. The first pillar, the first of these elements, is responsibility for our own impact. In that respect, the Amadeus Environmental Management System is the tool we use to measure, report, identify best practices, and constantly improve the environmental performance of our operations. It is based on the direct measurement of impact at 14 of our largest sites worldwide, which includes approximately 70% of our workforce, which then is used to estimate the impact of the remaining sites. The environmental management system measures 5 elements that are both relevant and also for which we have a certain capacity to manage. And these are the electricity consumption, the CO2 emissions released, the water usage, the waste generated, and the paper. The impact of our operation is divided basically into two parts. That of the data center in Germany and the office buildings worldwide. Importantly, we are currently migrating the operations of the data center to the Microsoft Cloud, which is expected to improve our flexibility, scalability, and also the energy efficiency in our data processing activities. Some of the initiatives and achievements that we can name as examples are the creation of a green IT team, focusing on the environmental efficient development of software and training of our developers. In this respect, we have recently joined the industry initiative called the Green Software Foundation, in which we share best practices with other technology companies. An important milestone in our sustainability path was the achievement of carbon neutrality at our data center in Erding in 2019. This was achieved through a combination of initiatives that included the implementation of energy efficiency measures guided by external advisors, like, for example, the improvement of the cooling of our servers. In this respect, Amadeus Data Center received its first certification as an energy efficient data center back in 2010, and this certification has been subsequently renewed. Nonetheless, the growth of the business made it impossible to reduce energy consumption in total terms, and that is why we needed additional measures to reduce our emissions. In 2019, we started using guarantees of origin of renewable energy to reduce the emissions of the data center to zero. All in all, the environmental management system has provided visibility about the best performance of our sites, and we identified best practices that could be exported to the rest of our offices. This has translated into a constant decrease of energy use per employee from the initial 4,300 kilowatt hour per employee when we started measuring a decade ago, to the current levels of less than 2,700 kilowatt hour per employee. Regarding targets, the most relevant ones are our commitment to reach full carbon neutrality by 2025, and we have also recently joined the Science Based Target initiative, by which we will define a plan to reach net zero in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement, and where, of course, we will be including all the emissions of our value chain. The second pillar of our strategy is about helping our customers to achieve their own sustainability targets. This is particularly important in an industry that is energy intense, like the travel industry. The idea here is to capitalize on the specific assets Amadeus possesses and that can be useful for this objective. I am referring particularly to our technology that helps to reach millions of travelers on a daily basis, and on our research, development, and innovation capabilities to help improve the operational and environmental efficiency of our customers' operations. Later, my colleague Olivier will explain our initiatives in this area. Finally, and as I said before, if we take sustainability of the industry seriously, we need to acknowledge that it is a global challenge by definition, and that it doesn't make sense to limit our initiatives to those related to our operations. We need to work together with other industry players in a non-competitive way, so that each of us contribute with our unique expertise and assets for the common long-term sustainability goal. There is no other way. Today, we have 3 examples of how we want to make this collaboration happen. And we have representatives from climate solutions provider Chooose, manufacturer of sustainable fuel Caphenia, and travel industry association Travalyst. For now, Rob, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. That was very helpful to set the scene for us and to help us to understand what Amadeus is doing as a company, a large company in the travel technology industry. Now let's hear from another Amadeus expert on the topic of sustainability in travel. Amadeus has, as Lucas alluded to, travel industry customers all around the globe. So what's the company doing to help customers operate in a more sustainable way and to meet the growing expectations of environmentally conscious travelers? Well, I'd like to welcome Olivier Girault, Vice President, Sustainability Ecosystem Initiatives at Amadeus, to discuss this point with us. Over to you, Olivier.
Thank you very much, Rob. What we see is that travelers care about climate change, and COVID has only intensified their determination to be more conscious in the choices they make. Similarly, Amadeus customers recognize that becoming more sustainable is vital for their business success. And the world at large is watching to see if we, as an industry, can step up to the climate challenge. So the next question is not going to be about travel growth, but about sustainable travel growth and how a company like Amadeus can support the industry and reach net zero and at the same time have commercial success. If there is one thing we are convinced about, it's that we must work in partnership to make it happen. Hence today's webinar, where we are bringing industry experts from various parts of the sustainability spectrum and inviting them to share their insights. At Amadeus, when it comes to powering more sustainable journeys through technology, we have 2 main goals. First, helping our customers to achieve better environmental performance. And second, equipping travelers with the information they need to choose or not to choose more sustainable travel options. So we are supporting our customers by equipping them with a portfolio of solutions. And as the R&D leader in travel technology, we can contribute to developing solutions that may help our customers to improve their operational and environmental efficiency. So to this end, we have focused and structured our effort in 4 key domains: display, compare, monitor, reduce, offset, and capture. On display, compare, and monitor, it is really about adding information on sustainable travel options, so displaying data and enabling people to compare. Today, we are already providing airline carbon emission information among many of our selling platforms, and we intend to provide more detail on full trip emissions and comparative displays based on those sustainability criteria. Reduce is about developing solutions that enable Amadeus customers to minimize their environmental impact and improve their efficiency. For instance, by working with customers such as airlines and airports, we can have an influence on areas such as fuel efficiency, because we reduce time that aircraft spend on the runway, because we are streamlining landing slots, and reducing congestions around major transport hubs. So all resulting in a reduction of CO2 emissions. Offset, it's about bringing carbon offsetting options into our selling platforms and to give travelers the option to easily and as accurately as possible offset the carbon emission. We know and recognize it is vital to develop long-term solutions to reduce or avoid carbon emission, but offsetting has a meaningful role to play today, providing a useful lever to take climate action now. And for offsetting, we are working with organizations that comply with internationally recognized standards so that travelers can trust that offsetting is being done effectively. And last, capture. It is about meeting long-term climate goals in travel. And without innovation such as carbon capture, it might be very difficult. So carbon capture, by removing carbon directly from the atmosphere and storing it into the earth or transforming it into SAF, for instance, could play a key role along with all other forms of carbon reductions. Innovation, such as carbon capture, are likely to be vital for sectors such as aviation. So here, we want in Amadeus to have room to explore new decarbonization territories. To be able to bring those solutions to the market, we are working hand in hand with partners. And in any sustainability-driven solution approach, you always have the same equation. First, you need to measure because you cannot reduce what you are not quantifying. Then you have to do everything possible to reduce emission if they cannot be and if they cannot be reduced, you have to offset. And this is exactly why we have invited Travelist, Chooose, and Caphenia to join us today. Travelist is building a uniform industry-wide sustainability framework that is credible and easy to understand for both travel providers and consumers. And if we can benefit from recognized and consistent frameworks on carbon emissions or on green hotel certification, we will all benefit. We have invited Chooose, our partner, to explain the benefits of immediate action through climate solution. Through our partnership, Chooose will be able to offer to travelers and travel agents a range of climate solutions to mitigate the carbon emission associated with a given trip. And finally, we have invited Caphenia to discuss some of the most promising and exciting midterm solutions for aviation decarbonization, sustainable aviation fuel. Caphenia today is developing the capability to produce SAF through new technology routes under what we call the synthetic and power to liquid category, and we will discuss this very promising avenue a bit later. So in a nutshell, we want to help the travel industry to deliver on its 2050 net zero goal, and we will do it in partnerships with our ecosystem of partners. So over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Olivier. That was really insightful. As both Lucas and Olivier have mentioned, it takes a truly collaborative approach to achieve real success and change the way things have been done in the industry for a very long time. And that's why we're delighted to welcome three guests who are sustainable travel specialists. First, we'll hear from Tim Lunan of Travelist. Let me give you some background about the organization. Travelist is a not-for-profit organization which seeks to catalyze sustainability within the tourism industry. Founded by Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, in 2019, the growing global coalition includes some of the biggest brands in travel: Amadeus, Booking.com, Expedia Group, Google, Skyscanner, Trip.com Group, TripAdvisor, and Visa. Travelist provides supportive, independent, and neutral governance, empowering the coalition of travel companies and service providers to share data and accelerate change. The goal is to bring credible, consistent sustainability information to the mainstream, helping both travelers and travel companies make better, greener choices. Tim Lunan is the head of product and partnerships at Travelist. Tim has a decade of experience in travel and climate tech and started his career in the hospitality industry. So Lucas Bobes is now going to interview Tim to find out more. Over to you, Lucas and Tim.
Thank you, Rob. And Tim, thank you very much for joining us today in this webinar. Tim, we have seen over the past years many different industry initiatives, perhaps because they all are aware that something needs to be done to tackle sustainability in general and climate change in particular. In this respect, tell us a little bit more about Travalyst, especially why was Travalyst created?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lucas, and thanks, Rob, for that great introduction and for having us on board today. You're absolutely right. Our founder saw that through his lifelong dedication to conservation of our planet and the wildlife and communities on our planet, tourism has a massive impact, both on the good as well as the bad. And he saw that bringing sustainable travel to the mainstream would require a collaborative effort, and so brought together some of the world's biggest companies in travel around the same table as part of a pre-competitive coalition to encourage and support them to work together on this mission. We believe that no one company or entity is ever going to solve the challenge of creating a truly sustainable system alone. And the first step is creating a clear, accurate, and shared baseline on where we stand today, so we know how to target interventions and collective action. To do that, we have to bring data to the mainstream for the first time at scale. And that's where, as Travalyst, we aim to learn from and work with those great initiatives that already exist to collaborate, create alignment, and use our experience and technology to help them scale.
Thank you, Tim. We certainly sympathize with many of the things you've said, not with all. But there have been, as I said, many different initiatives. I would like to understand for our audience as well, what makes Travalyst unique from other initiatives that seek more or less, one could argue, similar objectives?
Absolutely. As you said, there have been thousands, if not tens of thousands, incredible initiatives across the industry, but most have either developed in isolation or have struggled to achieve true scale. So we end up with a very fragmented situation where it is incredibly confusing for both consumers and suppliers, which doesn't help anyone, as no one wins from thousands of different schemes, all having a slightly different meaning or approach to sustainability. As Rob mentioned before, we operate as a pre-competitive coalition focused on standardizing that data and creating alignment where there currently isn't, to ensure contingency via neutral and independent governance of our organization. One of the greatest learnings for me personally has been that where there is misalignment, it often happens by accident, purely due to the lack of transparency or collaboration. And that's what we're looking to change.
Thank you. Well, Travalyst certainly has, as Rob explained at the beginning with the list of members, Travalyst has reached, in our opinion, a certain size and that makes it certainly different from other initiatives, as you said, has been working in isolation. Going now specifically to the initiatives that Travalyst is developing, can you tell us a little bit what is the scope of these sustainability frameworks you mentioned, and what are the principal areas of work you are engaging into?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, we've doubled the coalition in size, but in the past year, and I'm incredibly lucky because I get to work with some of the smartest people in travel on a weekly basis. As Travelist, we convene weekly working groups where product managers from across the coalition collaborate on advancing the frameworks to help consumers and companies make better choices. So what that means is, in terms of aviation, is our standardized framework to calculate emissions, which was launched in April, has already been implemented by a number of our partners, ensuring that consistent information is shown to consumers across those platforms. Our Aviation Working Group collaborates to provide consumers with the same emissions data when they search for flights, with the intention to allow everyone to select the lowest impact flight, no matter what platform they are using. Participants of the group take an iterative approach and are constantly contributing data, resources, and expertise in the joint interest of ensuring the model is accurate and comprehensive. On the accommodation side, our accommodation working group has aligned behind a growing list of sustainability attributes, and participants of the group are enabling properties on their platforms to submit information on those practices. And so across points of purchase, consumers can find this information to help inform what they might book next. The aim is for all accommodation providers to show where they currently sit on their path towards sustainability, and the scope for this is, and will be for some time, continuously expanding. For example, alongside environmental attributes, increasing the representation of sustainable practices in the destination and community category.
Thank you. Tim, we definitely see the need for implementing sustainability standards. In fact, we have been looking for a solution for that for some time, because it is quite disturbing and confusing, as you said, that we find many different evaluations depending on who you ask. So it's very important that we work together in the industry towards that goal. And so we are very happy to join Travelist. In the coalition, in fact, there are several and very different players. What do you expect from us so that we can contribute to the objectives of the coalition?
As you know, Lucas, we are so excited to have Amadeus in the coalition. Amadeus being a part of Travelist significantly enhances our reach and will ultimately enable the travel management companies and technology partners that Amadeus powers to make more sustainable bookings for their clients. In my role, it's been amazing to see Amadeus hit the ground running and already add so much value to our working groups on a weekly basis through your sheer amount of knowledge and expertise that you bring to this space.
Thank you. We certainly believe in that each of us in the industry should contribute with our own assets, and expertise. And certainly we see that reach and technology is part of ours. Finally, in the coming years, going to another subject, travelers, we expect, will be equipped with better information to make sustainable travel choices. But today, the fact is that the proportion of passengers that, for example, opt for carbon offsetting option is too low to make a difference. We haven't seen yet the poll that we made earlier in the webinar, but in fact, this is more or less the information that we get from different sources. Beyond setting standards for travelers, do you see a role that the coalition should play to promote sustainable travel among consumers? How can we contribute to improving the current low levels of adoption?
Absolutely. We often refer to this as the intention to action gap. And research from our partners shows time and time again, and I think it came back in the poll just before as well, that consumers and companies want to travel more sustainably, but they feel unable to do so because of the lack of clear, consistent, and trusted information. And that's what Travelist as a coalition is trying to address. The global baseline data set that we've collected is helping us understand where operators, for example, by geography or lodging type, need more support in adopting sustainable practices. This can be through education or simply getting access to whatever they need to switch to that more sustainable practice. Working with these operators to improve will in turn increase the pool of sustainable options for consumers to choose from. And in addition, we have this amazing opportunity to use our collective voice to help raise awareness on what good looks like and where and how consumers can turn their intention into action when booking that next trip.
Thank you. Rob, over to you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Tim and Lucas. That was very interesting. And now another company that's been making the headlines recently is Chooose. Shortly, Olivier will interview Andreas Sletvold, who's the founder and CEO of Chooose. But first, let me tell you a little about that organization. So Chooose is the leading global platform to build, manage, and report on customer-centric climate action programs for the travel industry and their customers. Andreas was named Entrepreneur of the Year in Norway in 2019. Congratulations, Andreas. And is passionate about the decarbonisation of the aviation industry and how technology can be applied to solve such big challenges. I'd like to hand over to Olivier and Andreas to find out more.
Thank you, Rob, and welcome, Andreas. So, to start, a very simple question. Could you briefly explain what carbon offsetting is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thanks for having me, Amadeus, and thanks for participating. So, carbon offsetting is quite a broad term. In reality, what it is a tool that helps organizations to, I'd say, address carbon emissions associated with business activities. It can also be helping individuals addressing the carbon footprint of my activities. If you peel off one layer and you go one layer deeper, it is about supporting climate projects worldwide. It is an effort to, I'd say, balance out unavoidable emissions that is created by my activities. If we peel away yet another layer, and I think we should, what it really is, it's climate financing. It is effectively the moving of funds from me as an individual, me as a corporate buyer, and now specifically in the travel industry, and funneling those funds to climate projects elsewhere in the world. I think one, I'd say, flaw with carbon offsetting is it doesn't change the underlying mechanics. It doesn't necessarily change the business model. The emissions from me flying to, for instance, Nice to visit Amadeus will not go away. So it is an effort to at least try to balance it out. I think kind of high level, that's one way of viewing it. If we kind of look at when people say carbon offsetting, all offsets are not created equal. It's not a one size fits all. And there's huge differences between these climate projects that generate the carbon credits that are used to carbon offset. So, it really ranges from nature-based solution, from forest projects, community projects, typically like cook stoves, etc. It can be renewable energy replacing fossil, but it's disconnected from the act of flying, for instance. It is disconnected from those emissions. So I think high level, it's about balancing, but it doesn't necessarily change the underlying emission, the way to emissions.
And I guess later we can go back to how we can connect it better with the act of traveling or flying. So you've been in business for several years, and you've seen actually the market change. You've seen the evolving behaviors of the travelers. So what would you say, with all your knowledge and experience, what would you say are today the conditions of a good adoption rate for climate solution? What makes it a success?
Yeah, so a couple of angles and a couple of perspectives, where I think one is, I'd say, airlines, OTAs, kind of the platforms enabling travel, and the other one being, the traveler as such. I think one extremely positive, I'd say, trend that we've seen really accelerating over the last, let's say, 12 to 18 months, disregarding COVID actually, is that, treating climate in context of a transaction has been very much professionalized. It's really moved from this, voluntary donation-based treatment that is quite detached from the underlying footprint into being, a professional service, an integrated part of effectively building an itinerary. We see a clear shift towards a deep technical delivery, and not just, just an offset in the booking flow, for instance, but it's a deep technical delivery. It's treated as a real product. We typically work with product teams and sustainability teams with our partners. So moving away from this donation-based methodology and over to, it's an actual product and it should be treated like one. We see an increased, and again from airlines, OTAs, and very much, sign off on what Travelist said, very deep focus on precise emissions. So one thing is, comparing apples and apples, which is extremely important, but it's also a very clear demand from market when it comes to reporting. Reporting for corporates that are offsetting or are using these type of services. And then you move into localization, because the reporting requirements in Japan is very different than in France. And it's different in the US than in the UK and in Norway, where I'm based. So the localization part and the ability to, I'd say, apply different type of methodologies. And I think I saw a question in the Q&A related to this. We see an increased focus on that, the flexibility and the ability for the end user to actually, especially B2B, decide on methodology. So that's the third trend. Also very positive. We see a very, very strict focus on quality. The time of old, not very good, low quality projects because they're cheap, that time is over, which we find extremely encouraging, and we wouldn't touch them either. Deep focus on transparency, flow of funds, so really professionalized process from, I'd say, the partner side, airlines, OTAs, etc. On the consumer side, kind of the average traveler, to your question, I think today a good adoption rate would be around 10%. It's still very much a gap between intention and action, as Travelist alluded to. But 10%, I'd say, is a decent performing program today. But there are ways to get that number much higher as well. We don't have time to go into that today, but
no, but it could be quick. Yeah. So I mean, just to summarize what I understand, I mean, you talked about integration, deep technical delivery, treating it as a real product, making sure that you can localize, especially the reporting capabilities, and moving into quality products. So going into one of the topic, which is maybe a bit more controversial about offsetting, because many people argue that offsetting can divert you from directly reducing emission in the travel industries. Yeah. So there are also questions, and you touch upon that, on the quality of the project, of the transparency of the project. So are offsets still a solution for the future of decarbonization?
Yes and no. That's the boring answer. I mean, a lot of that criticism, we fully agree. But back to my point, an offset is not an offset. They're not created equal. It all depends on the underlying quality. So I mean, if you can't really verify, that reduction, the CO2 reduction, is achieved. If you can't, run a proper KYC process, who is the beneficial owner? If you can't show flow of funds, then stay away. You have to be able to answer those questions. And if you can't be transparent, then stay away. That's our advice to every single partner, from large flag carriers to small travel agencies. Stay away if you can't answer to those questions. So, the one word is quality. Ensure high quality and transparency. So that's number one, which I'd say disqualify quite a large part of the market, to be honest. So that's part of the answer. The other part of the answer is, as I said, this is actually climate financing. And we operate on a thesis that in a hard to abate sector, it's a sector that is incredibly hard to decarbonize, that we're discussing today. I don't really like the position of, let's wait and see. Let's wait 15, 20, 30 years and see what's available then. We are focused on the facts. And the facts are, if you are to be net zero today, there's not really too many other options. And our view is very simple. It's better to act today and focus on what's next, and you transition and you optimize over time, than to just sit still and say, I'll wait for the batteries to be good enough or similar. I'm not saying either or, but I'm saying both. And in that context, offset does have a role to play. Look at any report from IATA or similar. Today it's like 90%. That will drop over time and will be replaced by something I hope we'll get into later. But today, yes, I mean, that's the facts, and that's reality. And we actually live today. We don't live in 2040 yet. So and then that, yes.
Yeah, actually, so it's a good transition to my next questions. I mean, talking about aviation, we see a trend of now going to a mix of offsetting projects, as you describe, and what is called insetting solutions. I mean, you refer to it in your first answer to say, okay, how can we make it more closer to home? I mean, more closer to travel. Yeah. So two questions here, if I may. Could you describe and explain to all of us what is insetting versus offsetting? Yeah. And second, I mean, do you see that as a long-term trend, and insetting projects taking over offsetting projects?
Yeah, so maybe a bit repetitive, but again, offsetting is balancing out an emission that will happen. Ideally, it's the unavoidable emissions, as you already mentioned in your presentation. You know, first you reduce and then offset what's left, but it doesn't really change the source of those emissions. That is offsetting. Insetting is different, and this is one of my favorite topics. Insetting is replacing what causes the emissions with a low emission alternative or a zero emission alternative. And again, back to the facts, we're living in 2022. What is available? Well, today, sustainable aviation fuel, and I'll use the term SAF for the remainder, is actually an option. Production is low, but it replaces jet fuel. It actually reduces the emissions at the exhaust pipe at the aircraft today. So that is insetting. So offsetting, balancing, you achieve a reduction somewhere else. Insetting, it's in your value chain, and it actually reduces emissions today, which is, of course, why we are quite excited about insetting taking off. When it comes to when will insetting take over? Well, ideally today, but as everyone online knows, it is very limited capacity when it comes to SAF production globally today. More and more production is coming online, but according to the data we've seen, we think you will kind of reach a 50-50 between offset and insets 15 years from now. We believe that will go faster. We believe more of a 10-year horizon, but it's still 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. And when you look kind of beyond 2030 onwards, we do believe that insets will be a significantly higher portion of what you can effectively reduce and be much higher than offsets. But it's still 2040 onwards.
Yeah. So maybe just a last question, because I think we are running out of time. So insetting and SAF, I mean, is the main example of insetting project for travel. How can you help? How can Chooose help the adoption of those of SAF, of insetting projects?
Yeah, so I think a couple of kind of important facts, I think, in this context. Number one is to replace the current fleet of aircraft. That's at least a 30-year horizon if we start today, and we're not starting today. Number two, SAF is incredibly expensive, so there are no airlines can carry that cost themselves. That will break their back, and people will can't afford to travel. So what we see already today is, and that we are doing today, we're doing this with Heathrow, Finnair, and multiple others, is to effectively surface SAF in context of the customers, B2B, B2C. What you achieve is effectively a cost sharing, where me as a corporate or individual, I address my scope 3 emissions by investing in SAF and effectively paying for the SAF, while the airline also get to reduce their scope 1. So we are already doing this with multiple airlines, OTAs, etc. But make SAF available, drive adoption, effectively drive down the cost for specifically the airlines with cost sharing. We see a lot is reporting driven, and a lot is really big enterprises driven by reporting needs. They have to address and inset their scope 3. I think the more we can fuel that. For instance, with Amadeus and others on this line, the faster this adoption will go, and the energy producers or fuel producers, they have no choice than to accelerate the production of SAF, and that's exactly what we need.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, always a pleasure to discuss with you and your very direct answers. Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you very much, Andreas and Olivier. That was very interesting. Now, our third guest speaker today is Mark Misselhorn. He's the founder and CEO of Caphenia. So let me tell you a little bit about that organization. Caphenia is a technology company that aims to provide renewable fuels, that is kerosene, diesel, gasoline, for all sectors of mobility. These fuels can be used as drop-in fuels in existing aircraft or ships or vehicles. This means that no adaptation of the infrastructure is necessary, and an immediate saving of CO2 emissions becomes possible. Caphenia has developed an innovative route for the production of fuels and protected it worldwide with over 200 granted patents. The company is based in Germany and was founded in 2018. In early 2023, construction of the pilot plant will begin, implementing for the first time all process elements, from the use of organic waste materials to the production of biomethane and CO2 to the production of high purity synthetic fuels. This is expected to realize the world's most efficient process of renewable synthetic fuels. Mark Misselhorn is founder and CEO of Caphenia. He started the first development work on renewable fuels in 2012, together with Lufthansa. He's an economist and worked as a consultant for the World Bank, United Nations Development Programme, and UNESCO before his career as a startup entrepreneur. Let's learn more from Mark and Olivier.
Thank you again, Rob, and welcome, Mark, and welcome everyone to the wonderful world of SAF. So again, I mean, same question as with Andreas on Offset. I mean, starting from the basics, what are sustainable aviation fuel? And I mean, could you explain the difference between biofuels and synthetic fuels? And maybe as a follow-up question, what is really specific or unique to Caphenia approach to SAFs?
Well, let's start really with the fuels. I think it's important to understand fuels. So fuels generally are hydrocarbons. As we can see here in the picture, there is a chain of carbon and hydrogen. So depending on the length of that chain, essentially you have kerosene, diesel, or gasoline. So in conventional fuels, what you see, all this carbon sort of extracted from a fossil source, from crude oil. And then if you burn this fuel, this carbon then ends up as CO2 in the atmosphere and increases the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. With SAF, that is different, obviously. What you do is you simply replace the gray carbon molecules, the fossil carbon molecules, with renewable carbon molecules. This can come from biogenic sources or CO2, for example. And then if you then burn that kind of fuel, you do not end up with additional CO2 in the atmosphere because all the carbon atoms were extracted from the atmosphere in the first place, put into the fuel, and then they are again sort of ending up in the atmosphere once we have used the fuels for propulsion. So the second question basically you ask is what's the difference between biofuels and synthetic? So in biofuels, you actually just let the plant do the work. So the plant creates some kind of oil, and then you use the oil like it's with the crude oil, you refine it, and the oil is sort of the biogenic oil is used to as part of the fuel. That's a bit different with synthetic fuels, because in synthetic fuels you sort of move away from letting nature do the work. You do it artificially, and that is really an opportunity from our perspective, because you can create the exactly same properties that kerosene has, but you can remove everything else. You can produce fuels of extreme purity on the one hand, and you can even adapt the properties of the fuel. So if you then combust these kind of fuels, you even avoid other effects, like, for example, the building of contrails in the air, which have their own sort of heating effects, or can have their own heating effects, because the combustion is taking place better, and you avoid, as I said, sort of contamination with other elements. So what you can see here on the picture is sort of the approach that we are taking. And the difference in Caphenia is there are definitely a lot of different routes to produce synthetic renewable fuels or sustainable aviation fuels. In our case, what we have created is a process that combines different sources where the energy comes from. On the one hand, the energy comes from biomass. On the other hand, it comes from renewable electricity. So what we call it's a power and biogas to liquid approach. So in our case, all the carbon atoms come from CO2 or CH4 from a biogenic source and replace all the fossil carbon. The big advantage is really that with that approach, you can reduce the amount of renewable electricity that you need for these kind of fuels. And that is, from our perspective, really the limiting factor, because so many sectors need this huge amounts of renewable electricity. So by bringing down the amount of renewable electricity by a factor of 6 in our fuels, replacing it partly by energy from biogenic sources or biomass, we can leave more renewable fuel electricity to other consumers. And second aspect,
no, sorry, go ahead.
So last aspect is really the efficiency. There are no byproducts. We can really increase the efficiency of those kind of fuels by almost 80% compared to the classical power to liquid fuels. So we can bring down costs.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you said something quite important, which is, I mean, different industries are going to compete for the source of this renewable electricity. And I mean, if it can be minimized, then it means more for everyone.
Yeah.
So if we move to travel and aviation, I mean, could you, for us, highlight the technical challenge to decarbonize aviation and why sustainable aviation fuel can really play such an important role to decarbonize travel?
Yeah, absolutely. The real problem, as I show here on the slide with aviation, is the fact that you need to provide energy in an extremely concentrated form. You need to bring down weight and volume of a plane sort of to be able to cover large distances. And it's important to understand that the energy density of fuels is extremely high compared to batteries. So in fact, kerosene has an energy density that is about 60 times higher than that of our best batteries. So looking at this example shown here, what you can see is that an A350 has a maximum takeoff weight of 280 tons. And 112 tons are just the fuel. That is the concentrated energy here. And it is burned. So the plane gets lighter during the flight. And at the end, it has to land. And the maximum landing weight is about 207 tons. Now, if you look at batteries, basically the weight stays the same. Mm-hmm. And the second aspect is that you would need a battery of 6,700 tons to supply the same amount of energy to the plane. So it's obvious that this is not going to be a solution for long-haul distance flights. In fact, as mentioned before by Andreas, I mean, looking at the lifespan of planes, 30 years or longer, almost all the reductions in CO2 emissions will come from sustainable aviation fuels.
Okay, so clear that I mean, SAF are the solution, but the problem that we face today is really on the adoption of SAF, not because people don't want to have SAF, but because of the cost and because of the supply of SAF. Today's production of SAF is a bit less than 1% of total EU jet fuel consumption. And the current pace of growth is quite far to meet the global climate objectives. So according to you, what is really needed to unlock the situation? Is it regulations? Is it blending mandates? Or is it just customer demand, I mean, coming from airlines or corporations?
Well, ultimately, I think it is blending mandates. Due to the fact that it is the key lever sort of to sort of switch from the fossil fuels to sustainable aviation fuels, because it creates a level playing field for all players. And the next aspect is that with blending mandates, you create security for investment into building up those huge facilities that you need to produce those fuels. And that was lacking in the past. So once these blending mandates are really created and the incentives are created, we will see massive investments. But before that, obviously, organic customer demand by airlines, corporations, and so on will be a strong catalyst to speed up that movement. And again, they can be the perfect means to create the incentives to build up those facilities. So creating this demand will really help to speed up the process and give a momentum to new projects. So from my perspective, it's both, but without blending mandates, we are lacking the sort of really long-term incentives that are necessary to build plants.
Okay, so blending mandates, and I mean, good news in some countries and actually in the EU, it's those blending mandates are either already here or are coming quite soon. So, I mean, in this overall, I don't know if we can call it ecosystem of SAF, there seems to be a lack of what we call a book and claim system, which is the ability to disconnect the supply of SAF and the demand. So not to be able to put the SAF on a very specific aircraft, but be able to claim the benefit of it. So there is a marketplace with several producers of renewable energies and fuel. How do you think it's going to evolve? Is it going to be competition? Is it going to be coalition? Is it going to be co-petition?
Well, I guess the last word you mentioned, co-opetition, is probably the key word. Because in the beginning, to establish a truly global SAF book and claim sort of system, definitely you need this cooperation of all players. And that's really necessary and will help to enable the production in places that really have the highest potential for sustainable aviation fuels. It will enable to implement projects in deserts, in places where you have lots of renewable electricity available potentially. So in the beginning, what you will see is with the establishment of such a system, you will create the incentives. But as you mentioned before, I mean, in the beginning, there's really a lack of sustainable aviation fuel. So probably there will be high prices for those fuels, for the and hopefully large profits for the producers of those fuels. No? But over time, clearly what you will see, this will create the necessary incentives for more competition. And then we will again have a situation where we will really compete and people will book only clearly the cheapest SAFs they can get. And so with that competition, this will bring down the prices of SAF considerably in the medium to long term. So in the beginning, necessary cooperation, but hopefully in the long term, a lot of competition because we will need it to create wealth.
Okay. Maybe one last question, and again, more forward-looking, if we can be more forward-looking with SAF. But I read that the sustainable aviation fuel that you're going to produce have the capacity to reduce up to 90% the CO2 emission compared to fossil fuels. Have you thought about what it would take not to be at 92%, but to be at 100% of CO2 reduction? Is it something that is possible in the near future?
In the beginning, it's a challenge, but the positive answer is yes. Why is it yes? Because the way we create those fuels is that we can actually extract also the carbon from those chains of hydrocarbons. What we can do is we can produce a solid carbon. And in the follow-up project to our pilot plant that we will build next stage, we will build a plant that will do exactly that. It removes carbon as a solid. So what happens when we use organic material, again, sort of via photosynthesis, biomass extracts CO2 from the atmosphere. Then we produce biomethane and we extract the carbon from the process as a solid. It can be used in the building industry. So it ends up in houses. So it is extracted from the atmosphere and ends up in a house, in a building. So in fact, we can reverse, if we do this, climate emissions that were created in the past. So in fact, we will hopefully give companies the opportunity in the future to not just be carbon neutral, but to remove even emissions that were created in the past. So carbon negative fuels are possible and hopefully we will see them in the future.
Okay, so which might mean another round of discussion for this, let's say, quite positive news. So thank you very much, Mark, and back to you, Rob.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you again, Mark and Olivier. That was, I think we understand the scale of the challenge, but also good to hear the positive movements. Now at Amadeus, we're convinced that travel contributes positively to our world in many ways, and I'm sure that many in the audience would agree with that. We believe the benefits include things like economic development, cultural exchange and understanding, to connecting people from different parts of the world and contributing to a more diverse and tolerant society, just to name a few. And we believe that these benefits, the benefits of travel, really need to be nurtured. But at the same time, as an industry, we also need to break the current correlation between growth in travel, as more people around the world begin to travel, and also any negative environmental impacts that such growth entails. So in partnership with our colleagues across the industry, we want to contribute to achieving more efficient and sustainable travel solutions. Ultimately, we're aiming to reduce the environmental impact while maintaining all the benefits of travel. And on that note, I do have a final question to ask all our speakers. And the question is, in the area of climate solutions, is there any major trend or change that you recommend we keep an eye on? Maybe we could answer in order of the speakers. Have you spoken already? So starting with Lucas, perhaps.
Thank you, Rob. Well, actually, from hearing from our speakers today, I would say that the role of technology is probably underestimated. Not that I want to challenge what Dr. Mark said, but in fact, just a few days ago, I read that the NASA is starting to find ways to build solid batteries to reduce this energy intensity ratio to 20, around 20 instead of 16. No? And I don't know, I'm far from being an expert there. But if you take a look at what has happened in the past few years, what I see a disconnect between what the current models predict as the contribution of technology to fight climate change and what we see in reality. No? So I hope that we see something much more positive in that area than what we have seen up until now.
Thank you, Olivier.
So what I would say first is SAF, and SAF, and we discussed it at length today. Second, I would mention the evolution of regulation and some of the sustainability mandates in different parts of the world that could really trigger the acceleration of changes, and maybe more a wish than a confirmed trend. But if we look in particular at aviation, this is a very concentrated industry with large market and emission shares done by a limited number of players, whether it's aircraft manufacturers, airlines or airports. So to be on the positive note, it might mean the ability to make decisions quickly that could have a significant impact in the short to medium term. So that's my 3 trends.
Great, thank you. And Tim, are you there? Tim, we don't have your video at the moment. I don't know if it's working or not.
I seem to be unable to start it, okay. But yes, still here. Thanks, thanks, Rob. I think in terms of the trends, what I hear coming up more and more, and maybe that's just because of the space that I'm in, is the term radical collaboration. And I think everyone's waking up to the fact that we have a lot of work cut out for us, and what we see happen more and more within the industry is that people are starting to think bigger and more bolder about achieving the change that we need to in order to truly transition our industry to be net positive. And that new, I guess, still relatively new concept of being able to collaborate with everyone and within this industry to help drive the change that is needed is really, really exciting to see happen.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Tim. And Andreas?
Yeah, I think I'll base my answer on data. We see from kind of across all our integrations, which spans from Japan in the east to Chile in the west, more than 80% of those opting in to a climate option are below the age of 43. That says something to us and where that market will go. So I'd say, not addressing the carbon footprint as a travel enabler in 2022, well, I'd say that's not really acceptable. And number two, you're getting extremely close to license to operate. So this has to be taken seriously. And I applaud everyone who are highlighting partnerships and collaboration. That's the only way forward.
Great, thank you. And Mark.
Well, I guess we really have to watch out for the large public announcements on these renewable fuel projects, because once we will see the first projects implemented in deserts and large-scale projects, there's going to be really a serious momentum that's going to develop. And I think that then we will really be able to see a strong decline in the carbon footprint of mobility within a relatively short time frame, because we do not have to adapt the infrastructure if we are able to implement those projects. It will take a couple of years, but the momentum, once it is started, will be really fast.
That's good. That's very encouraging. That's a nice thought to end on. So I'm sure the audience would like to join me in thanking all our participants today. So that's Lucas Bobes, Olivier Girold, Tim Lunen, Andreas Sletvol, and Mark Misselhorn. We want to thank you, speakers, for really sharing your insights and expertise on what's being done and what still needs to be done to create a sustainable travel industry. That's what we're interested in, isn't it? And there's a lot of debate on this topic. And I, for one, I'm sure I speak for everyone, I really appreciate the clarity and the transparency that you've demonstrated today and that you've brought to the conversation. Climate activist Greta Thunberg once said that all we have to do is wake up and change. Well, I think based on what we've heard today, I think the travel industry has woken up, and I think it is changing. That's clear to me. Now, don't forget, for the audience, we are fast running out of time, but please do, if you have any questions, do add them to the Q&A facility. I've seen that some of our speakers have actually been answering questions as we've gone along, but if we're not able to answer them during the webinar, we will answer them by email or on our website, so you'll be able to get your answers. At the beginning of the webinar, we invited you to answer some questions. So we'd like to look at the answers that you gave and perhaps see how they compare, how the audience compared with your own answers. So question one was about how important is sustainability for the future of the travel industry? And surprise, surprise, 87% said it's extremely important. Or, well, actually, if you add the somewhat important, which are the two top answers, then you go to a whopping 99%. So not surprising, and great that we've had the opportunity to be able to discuss and debate the issues and really get a better understanding of what's involved. Thank you for that one. And the second question we had, let's get the answers to that one, was what does sustainable travel look like to you? And this is where you could choose more than one answer. And I think we have discussed a number of these points. It seems like the top one there was the alternative fuels and new technologies. So it was good that we spent time discussing that. Also, alternative means of transportation. We probably haven't spent a lot of time discussing that, but we could do that in the future. And also, I think another key one there that we see is the display of emissions at booking time to help travelers make an informed choice, because people need information, don't they, if they're going to make the choices that are what they believe in for the future. And then we had another question. This was the question about if you're a traveler yourself, and we mentioned about intention and actions. Sometimes there's a separation between the two things. So are you willing to pay extra as a traveler for more sustainable travel options? So 40% said yes, 12% said no, and then 48% said maybe. So I'd say it's a yes or maybe from our audience thinking as travelers there. So that was interesting too. I don't know if we have time to do any more questions. We only have a few minutes left. Did any of the presenters want to raise any of the questions that came out in the chat? Yes, Olivier.
I mean, yeah, I tried to answer some of them on the fly. I'm seeing one from Harish Negi on, we are getting CO2 emission for every flight, but how can we average out the score that which flight combination emit less CO2 emission in some percentage. I mean, this is exactly one of the objectives that we are after. So, which is to enable comparative displays so that you are able, as a traveler or as a corporation, to be able to rank on the sustainability criteria the different flight options. And hence the collaboration that we are starting with Travelist, to be able to have that granular level of information to be able to make differences between different flights. So I hope I answered that question.
Good, good. Thank you, Olivier. I think that's a very common one. And any others?
I mean, I can also try to answer the first one from Marlon on the weight of baggage in the air. And I mean, very true. The lighter you travel, the less emissions you're going to emit, because obviously in the air, weight is of importance. And on that area, for instance, we are looking at, I mean, nudging or how we can entice corporate travelers, for instance, to travel lighter and give them rewards on choosing, I mean, for instance, to bring less luggage into the air. So it's not always about stick, it can be about carrots and providing, let's say, incentives to people to have more sustainable travel behaviors. So, I mean, that's an example, and yes, it's getting some attention from us.
Excellent. Thank you for answering those questions. Well, I think our time's nearly up now. So what I'd like to do is just ask the audience, if I may, just to ask you two final questions. One is to rate the webinar itself, and also to tell us whether you're interested in similar topics. So we're going to have some questions come up on the screen momentarily. There they are. So just please rate the webinar, tell us how we did, and also whether you're interested in hearing more about sustainability in travel, or other things like environmental, social and governance, CSG topics, future of mobility and innovations and things like the metaverse. So please do answer those. That will help us. And then finally, on behalf of the presenters and the organizing team at Amadeus today, I just wanted to thank you as an audience. Thank you very much for attending. We know there are a lot of webinars on this topic, but I think you'll have to agree this was a very good one. We heard from some excellent specialists who really helped us to see all the challenges and the opportunities much more clearly. Well, for me anyway, I can say. And we covered a lot of ground. So you'll be pleased to know that the recording will be available, so you can review some of the points, because I know we went a bit deep into some. And if it's the first time you're hearing it, it could be a little bit hard to follow, but you can review that in your own time. And then finally, just to leave you with a quote from the scientist Carl Sagan, who I thought summed it up beautifully when we're thinking about sustainability and our planet Earth. He said, "Preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known." So thank you and goodbye.